Hey everybody, welcome back to Emma's Pearls. Today with me is Kim, and we are talking to Kimball and to David. So Kimball, will you introduce yourself again and your relationship to Silas, and then introduce David?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kimball Clark. I am the owner of Kindex, and you did an interview me. You did an interview on me a little while back, and I also happen to be a direct descendant of um, Asel Smith, who is Joseph Smith's grandfather through Silas, and then down to Jesse N. Smith. And Jesse N. Smith is the is let's see, he would be my great great grandfather, and he would be David's great grandfather. And David, who's there with us today, is my uncle, and he's been what I was telling Angeline, and Kim earlier is that he's been the magnet of all of the records for the Smith family. Is at least I would probably say Emma Larson Smith and Jesse N. Smith to a large degree. He's had a lot of the records. A lot of the records basically have come forth through family lines through David because they were just kind of came to him, probably from his mother, who was Dorothy Smith, the daughter of Hiram, which was Jesse N. Smith's oldest and tallest boy from his fifth wife, Emma Larson. So that's the connection of me to David, and how I guess David and myself are connected to Jesse N. Smith, who is connected to Asel Smith.
So David, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and then kind of tell us about Jesse? Because we want to talk about Jesse and get to know Jesse and some of the stories that are carried through your family.
Sure. Well, I was born back in '55, and I'm the youngest in my family. And my mother, Dorothy, her grandfather is Jesse N. Smith, who we've been talking about. And so that was her grandfather, and although she never got to know him because of when he died, I was fortunate to get to know his son Hiram Smith, as Kimball just talked about. So that's my grandfather, and he lived in my home for a while, and he was a great influence, and I wish I'd had asked him more questions about his father, Jesse N. Smith, because Jesse N. Smith is the youngest of those first cousins, meaning all the, Joseph and Hiram and all the rest of them. But Jesse was quite a bit younger. He wasn't born until 1834. Fortunately, my mother got me involved in family history early on. I've been working at it to one degree or another since the 1960s, when I was maybe around 10 years old or something, doing family history charts and looking back. And I found it very interesting to learn about the family, and including Jesse and Smith, because he kept a journal. I read that journal many, many years ago, and it was good to learn about the whole family. Silas was a younger brother to Joseph Smith Sr., and so, as Kimball mentioned, Asel and Mary Duty Smith are the grandparents, not only to Joseph and Hiram, but also to Jesse and Smith, and making them my third great grandparents. And it was good to learn about them. In fact, I was very interested to learn about the early days with the family, that I've learned from maybe different sources, but partly from the journal, because Jesse was good to write about his family as he introduced the journal. So his father, Silas, actually had an earlier wife that died, and his second wife had 3 children with Silas, and Jesse and Smith was the youngest of those 3. But they were living up in New York at the time, I forget which town, but when the gospel was restored and the Book of Mormon was translated by Joseph Smith, the family was communicating with Silas and with the other brothers that were living also there in New York, but not down in Palmyra. And I hope I get all my facts straight, but I might not. It's a lot of this I'm doing from memory. But the thing that impressed me was that Joseph Smith Jr. himself wrote a letter to our great-great-grandfather, his uncle Silas Smith, telling him how important the gospel is. And I don't have that here to read, and that's not necessary, but he wanted to share that with his family. And Silas Smith didn't join the church immediately, but his, Hiram Smith, his other nephew, came up and visited him and talked to him as well as others, and eventually Hiram Smith did baptize Silas Smith. And I really appreciate the part that Silas Smith eventually played to help the family somewhat. You know, Asel and Mary Duty, the grandparents, they ended up living with Silas Smith for a while. And, Asel having said that sometime in the future there would be a person in his family that would produce something of great significance in religious history, which he did. And they brought the Book of Mormon up to show Asel while he was living with Silas, I believe. And Asel says, yeah, this is it. This is Joseph. This is the great thing that I felt should happen, that would happen. And so Silas and his second wife, Mary Aiken Smith, they brought their younger family, those three children of Mary Aiken Smith, to Kirtland, and they were able to bring Mary Duty Smith, the grandma, down to Kirtland, Ohio. And she she wanted to get baptized, but she was so old and infirm, so that didn't happen. But she died before she was able to get baptized. But Mary Akins, who was the aunt, of Joseph Smith, she was there in Kirtland, and she wasn't baptized yet. She would go to her church there, and she had received some inspiration, a revelation, saying, this isn't the right place. Little Jesse was just a little boy at the time, and he got restless there at church, and his mother realized, this isn't the right place to us. So she went over, and she did end up getting baptized and raising Jesse and his brother in the restored gospel.
Hey, David, can
Yeah.
I just ask a question really quick? You mentioned that when Asel first gets to look at the Book of Mormon and he realizes that what he had foreseen had come to pass, can you just share a little bit about how difficult a time that was? Because there was a lot of opposition from Joseph Sr.'s brother, Jesse.
Something I was thinking about earlier. So Jesse Nathaniel Smith apparently was named after his uncle Jesse, right? Who, if I remember right, is the oldest of those brothers, the sons of Asel. And from what I had learned and read, that Jesse was very much against the church that Joseph Smith had restored, and gave a hard time to his brothers and those that came to talk to him. I mean, I think he came and talked to Silas and tried to, dissuade him. And I don't know all the details, or remember all of them, but Jesse never did join the church. And in fact, that was one source of family, I got a chance to try to help through temple work is because I'd said, well, all of my ancestors, their work's been done by my ancestors in the temple. Okay. But if I go up over to the side once, like through Jesse, who just never received the gospel and was not too kind to his brothers at times, I noticed as I looked at the temple records that some of the descendants of Jesse, Uncle Jesse, were done later on, after they died, and then I picked up from about 1936, after the last temple ordinance down that I saw on one of the lines, and started doing more work. So I have an interest in that Uncle Jesse, because he didn't accept the gospel then, but we wanted to give him and his descendants a chance. And it's unfortunate they were, he didn't receive the gospel, because so many of the other brothers did. In fact, John Smith, Silas Smith, the younger brother, he died trying to get out of Kirtland through Missouri to Illinois because of the extermination order. They were there on the Missouri River trying to make it over that way, since they couldn't go up to far west because the saints were being driven out. And Silas eventually got ill health. In fact, his second son died there near the banks of the river. They made it over into, I think it was Pittsfield or something like that, south of where Nauvoo was built in Illinois. And there was a little branch of the church. He was a branch president for a while, but then he got sick and died. So Mary Aiken Smith took her two remaining sons, Silas Sanford and Jesse and Smith, up to Nauvoo. First, there was a neighbor that helped them out, and then they went up to Nauvoo, and the Smith family was so gracious and helpful. They lived in a number of places in the Nauvoo area for a while. And so at that time, Jesse and his older brother Silas Sanford Smith were fatherless. They had their mother, but the Smith family, including Hiram and Joseph and others, let them stay in various homes. In fact, Jesse records that he was in the home with Joseph Smith Jr., his cousin actually, right? Even though Jesse's about a generation younger, and with Emma, Joseph's wife. And it was interesting to see what he wrote in his journal. I don't have it here to quote, but he lived there as a boy and was in their home for a while. And he just said Emma was so amazing, just an amazing person. All the help that she gave. Many people, not just family, that came to Nauvoo needed help and would stay at or near their home. And then, of course, he loved the prophet Joseph Smith. And later in his life, Jesse would think back and think, what a great legal mind Joseph Smith Jr. had to do what he had to do to try to get out of all the persecution and the things that were heaped upon him. But also just the affection he felt for Joseph Smith, because he felt it coming the other direction as his older cousin. He mentioned that he felt better around him more almost than anybody else. He knew. That's how much respect and love that he had for Joseph Smith, and he followed them ever after that. Followed the prophets that came after that. And so he grew up in Nauvoo. It's kind of interesting that with Joseph Smith, the third, I think, was maybe close to Jesse's age, even though he's a different generation, right? Jesse being so young. He was going to school and there in Nauvoo and learning how to read and stuff, and they had the Book of Mormon that they would read out of, and Joseph Smith the third had his. I think that was that that son of Joseph Smith Jr. But Jesse didn't have one, so Joseph Smith Jr. his cousin was kind enough to give him a copy, the new published second version, second printing of the Book of Mormon, and Jesse got that as a gift and used that to learn to read from, and but he just continued to grow in testimony and continued with the church with his mother and his older brother for many years. I could tell you more stories that come later in his life, but I really appreciate the larger Smith family, how they helped out Jesse and his mother and others during those times.
That's awesome. Real quick, what year did Silas die then?
Oh, that's a good question. Because I don't have that with me right now. That would have been when they were leaving Missouri and coming into Nauvoo.
That would be 1839 is when
Thank you
Silas
for
passed.
checking that out, because I don't have
Yeah.
that memorized. Okay, thanks.
I don't either. I just used Family Search.
Yeah, I was just trying to pull it up on mine. Just
Okay, and
before-
so then his wife came out west with Brigham Young then?
Yeah, so, okay, here we go with the Smith family again, helping out. Since Silas, Jesse's father, had died, when it came time for them to leave, and he was there to stand in line and to watch when I think he was maybe 9 years old, when Joseph Smith and Hiram were martyred, and he saw that. And then later, as the persecution increased in Nauvoo, and they were getting ready to leave, well, at some point, his uncle, John Smith, actually married Mary Akins. I think it's the kind of marriage where, you take care of your brother's family, right? He did that. And then Silas Sanford Smith and Jesse, his two nephews, would help him, and they actually crossed the plains together, followed Brigham Young. Both Silas and Jesse, as I understand, separately helped drive some of the wagons and oxen. Even though at that time, by the time they left and went across the plains, I think Jesse was 12 years old, and he helped drive one of the wagons. But he got across the plains with his brother and his mother because of John Smith, the uncle of Joseph, Hiram, and Jesse. And that's how they got to Utah.
Okay, that makes sense. Sorry, I feel like I pulled you forward, but if you want to go back and kind of give us a little bit more history on Jesse, that would be awesome.
Okay. I don't know how many details there in Nauvoo. I do remember hearing or reading that he was in the Nauvoo, I'm now forgetting the name of it. The children had a little like military style group in Nauvoo, and he joined in that. Real military, but I can't remember the name of it. But he grew up there, and I guess I don't have too many more details. I'm more thinking now after they crossed the plains as they got to Utah.
That works. I'll take one of their stories.
David, do you want to talk a little bit about the Book of Mormon gift that he received? Or the
Yeah.
Go
Well,
ahead.
where can he did receive that gift, and he had it, and he kept it. It stayed in the family, well, to some degree.
Yes.
So, and it was actually the second edition of the book of. We thought that there was an inscription there from Joseph Smith, saying, to Jesse, but then we had located it after it had been around to different places later with the church historian, and they examined it and the printing and decided that maybe that it could have been the handwriting of someone else writing what had been said and not what was actually written by Joseph Smith himself. But we did have that second edition. It kind of got passed down to certain people. I think my father, Hiram Smith, who is, one generation below the well-known Hiram Smith, because he was the son of Jesse and Smith. It had been in his hands at one point, but eventually it ended up in the first presidency safe in the Granite Mountain or somewhere there, wherever they kept it, because of its historical significance. And then they found it and brought it back out and showed it to the family a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. And many of us were able to go there and see that. That was pretty cool.
Yeah,
and
that was neat. And they had actually changed the binding on it. It had worn out. so it got used. Someone had done some more binding, they decided.
Well, yeah, and they didn't know who it was that did the binding, and that was kind of a big question was there actually an inscription from Joseph Smith on that original that was pulled out by someone and replaced and fabricated by another? Possibly. We don't know. Yeah. All we know is what we have now was likely not Joseph Smith's handwriting, and it was an inscription to Jesse that was not actually Joseph's writing. So, but we did know that it was passed down through the family.
We know it was a gift from Joseph Smith because Jesse and Smith records it himself.
Correct.
In his journal about having received that.
And how old was Jesse when Joseph was in town in Nauvoo? I mean, what age are we talking about? Like,
we're talking around 9 years old, and actually younger, because if you think about it, he was there a number of years. I think I heard reviewed lately that he was practically an infant when his father Silas was baptized by his older cousin Hiram Smith. Jesse was that young, and then they came to Kirtland. So they were there for a time, and so definitely I know by the time he was 9 and before, he was in Nauvoo, and was in the little Nauvoo Legion for the for the boys there. And by the time they left and crossed the plains, he was 12. So it was right through that period of his life, kind of pre-adolescent, that he spent there. Spent time with Joseph and Emma and others in the family.
So, if you don't mind, Angelina, do you want me to jump in and just demonstrate with some pictures and a little bit of some history that we have in Kindex? Okay.
Yes, we'd love that.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. So here I have just kind of a breakdown of Jesse and Smith's wives. I think it's important that you see that he had 5 wives. His first was Emma, second was Margaret, third was Janet, fourth was Augusta, and fifth was Emma, where we come from, David and I. And I think a really important thing to realize here is that Emma and Jesse, the age gap between the two was significant, almost 30 years. And I wanted to give you an example of that. I have a picture to show you kind of the distinct difference in age between the two. So remember, this is a woman who she herself, to my understanding, was not born in Scandinavia in that area, but rather she came from parents who were brought over in the groups that came by virtue of Jesse and Smith's preaching out there, and that's kind of how Emma was born in Salt Lake, I believe, or somewhere in Utah, and he ended up marrying her when she was relatively young and he was relatively old. So here's all the children from them. Now, something that I want to make clear, the power of when we document our history, how important that really is. I'm going to jump into this particular archive, and if I can find it, in fact, I might have to log in, but I wanted to show you what Jesse N. Smith did with his life sketch. So he has a 40-page life sketch here, all handwritten, all done. And as you can see, some of these pages have been transcribed by humans, but what our Kindex system can do is it can actually transcribe all of these. And I'm going to go ahead and run these while we continue talking. And by the end, we'll just show you kind of what that is. But what's kind of interesting is that if you jump into Jesse N. Smith's life sketch that he wrote himself, it looks like in 1884. Okay, he begins by saying he's born of goodly parents. I thought that was kind of cool. And talks about his ancestors. And then he goes on and on from there. So the few pictures that I'd like to demonstrate and show here today. Well, let's do. Trying to find some of JNS himself, or I refer to him as JNS because it's a quicker thing to say than Jesse N. Smith. But let me just show you some pictures here. So to understand who Jesse was, this is him as a mission president out in the Denmark area, and I believe he was there for, I don't know, David, if you can remind us how many years he served as the president of the Scandinavian mission, or how many times he went over there. Do you have any idea on that number?
Well, I don't know if I have all the details right. He was there at least twice.
Yeah.
He was there for 4 years, I believe, on his first mission, and they sent him back, and he was president the second time over. And I don't remember off the top of my head how many years he was there that second time. The second time, Brigham Young had said, "I want you to find another wife." That was his fourth wife before Emma Larson.
Right.
That he married there and brought her home. His second wife actually died while he was on his first mission to Scandinavia, and he had to come home to the family, grieving family, with the second wife gone.
Right. So here are the four of the five wives.
The one that
Emma,
died is missing out of the picture.
Right. And the one that died, actually, I'm not sure if we have a picture of her that we can still find. Here's
What I've seen is just a hand drawing, like an artist's conception.
Correct, right there.
Yeah.
So there's his five wives, and she's the one, I believe, that passed, right, when she was younger. So, but you can see the distinct age difference between these three and Emma, obviously. And one interesting thing to note, because she was from Scandinavia, specifically Sweden, when we have our reunions with the Smith line, there's a difference between those that are connected to Emma Larson Smith, the Scandinavian woman. She was a tall, blonde-haired woman, and everybody else, where everybody else was kind of a darker and shorter. So dark-haired and shorter. So I find that always interesting. Here's some pictures of Jesse N. Smith's sons, and as you can see, there's this tall guy here in the back. That's Hiram, who David and I descend from. Some of these sons do not all. I don't believe that all these come from that. These do not all come from the same wife, because he's the oldest of the last wife. This one right here, I think, is of import. I'd like to talk a little bit about him. This is Hiram's younger brother, Lehi. And David, correct me if I didn't get that right. I'm pretty sure that is Lehi. But Lehi served in World War One.
Who are you pointing to?
Right here. Do you see my cursor?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so Lehi died in World War One, at the very last few days of World War One, when they did the surge in the Argonne Forest, and was actually killed by a mortar direct hit in his foxhole. And we actually have that account and recently transcribed it in Kindex, a very profound account of many witnesses who said he was a great boy, great guy, and ended up getting killed out there. And I believe Emma had several children who served in the military, but I don't know how many of them passed. I think that only Lehi was the one that passed.
How many kids did Jesse have?
44.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So that was through 5 wives. Of course, the second wife, who died young, she only had like 2 or 3 kids, and then the others came to the other ones. And most of them were women, all right? Daughters. So these are the only sons he had. This is a good picture, about 14 of them.
Wow.
and the rest were all daughters, so most of the descendants aren't Smiths.
So here again is Lehi, the one who died in World War One, and here's Hiram, again the tallest. And you'll notice the significant age difference between some of these sons, right? And then how young he is, yet he is the oldest of the last wife. So it just kind of shows you the magnitude of, really when you have plural marriage and you have multiple wives spanning generations, how your family can be very diverse in age. You have, and what's interesting here is that you have this man whose actual half brother is this boy.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah, that's the youngest son and the oldest son's there.
yep, yeah. So these are, as you can see, those from Emma Larson, the tall, lank. You can see that difference, right? These three and these two come from one wife, whereas the vast majority, I think, probably come from others. I think this one comes from Emma Larson as well. But it's pretty evident when we have our reunions to see who's from Emma Larson and who's not. Okay, let's put it that way.
Wow.
So now here's another interesting picture. If I can have it pop up right, let's get it a little bigger here. So here's a shot of Jesse N. Smith in his older years with his wife Emma, and there's Hiram, who we descend from. This was likely, maybe David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming this is out in Snowflake, Arizona.
Yeah, this was the original home in Snowflake, Arizona, which was his second major pioneering assignment. I mean, first it was in Parowan, Utah, and then in his 40s he was told to move down to Snowflake with his 3 wives or so, and then it was down there that he met Emma. So Emma's on the far left as we're looking at it.
Right.
But that's his 5th wife. You notice the wife standing next to him, who's a little bit shorter, is the first Emma Seraphine West Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why they lined up this way for the picture. It's really because, I don't know if it's because they didn't want to get in trouble with the marshals trying to find polygamists, or you know what I mean? Or if it was just kind of natural. This is Jesse and his first wife, Emma. And none of these children in the picture are Emma Seraphine's children. This is Emma Larson Smith's children, with Joseph, Hiram, the oldest, standing in back there, the tallest. And they all lived in the same cabin, because most of Emma Seraphine's, the first wife's family, had grown up in Parowan, Utah. And by the time they were here, her children were gone, and what he actually created was that a compartment for his first wife, and then Emma and his youngest family was with the rest in the rest of the cabin. But this was a neat experience with how he was able to take care of 5 wives. Of course, it was only 4 at one time, the most, because the second one had died earlier on. But they had actually got along very well. All the children, from what have been told me, got along well. They didn't refer to each other as half-brothers and half-sisters. And here they are. You see them standing in front of the Parowan home here.
Right.
And a bunch of them. They were brothers and sisters, but they had different mothers. And in that little cabin where 2 of the mothers lived when they were in Snowflake, the older Emma, the first wife, would help the younger Emma with the children and the family there. And then as the older Emma got older, the younger Emma would help her. I mean, they just helped each other. You know, when you kind of think about sister wives, they were good to each other, and they were happy together. I don't ever remember hearing about any significant problems that came out of having, 4 to 5 wives in the
I know,
same.
I couldn't do that. That would not go well for me.
But Jesse handled it really well. Yes.
Yeah. Now here's a picture. I want to talk a little bit about this. This is Hiram as he got older, when I said that he took over the farm out in Palmyra. And those of you who understand Palmyra might be able to recognize this home. in particular. But there they are, him and his wife, June Augusta Bushman, who is where David and I descend from. And they were both from the Lethbridge, Alberta area. And interestingly enough, they have a they have a really wonderful story that my cousin Kathy Gilmore did a lot of research on about how they worked together as a couple and amazingly well. In fact, they ran a chiropractor business together, and she was actually key in starting a lot of the pageants out in Palmyra, the Hill Cumorah pageant, and they brought a lot of that theatrical know-how and experience from Lethbridge, which they did a lot of out in Lethbridge. And then when they, of course, came to Palmyra, they started initiating that. So that's kind of a neat story there. Do you want to comment a little bit more on that, David?
Yeah, in fact, about the pageant, one of their sons, in other words, my mother's younger brother, one of them, actually helped write one of the earliest versions of the Palmyra pageant. I think that might have been Oliver. I'm trying to remember who it was. It might have been Uncle Oliver. And he was a missionary at the time. In fact, he was the first missionary of the church sent out from Palmyra since the church left Palmyra. That was my uncle, because they moved back to Palmyra, and my grandpa Hiram and June, and it's their son was sent out as a missionary. So,
So did Hiram live polygamy?
no, he did not live polygamy at all. I'm trying to remember when they got married. They probably got married in the early 1900s. And by then, we'd already had two manifestos stopping polygamy at that point. So, I'm fortunate that my ancestors, including these Smiths ones, were very good at following the direction of the prophet and lived polygamy when they were asked and didn't when they weren't.
Which on the Clark side is a little bit of a different story.
Well, yeah, there's the Woolley one that is a little bit different. But
And the
anyway,
Woolley as well.
I was going
Yeah.
to mention about this house too that you have in the background. If you
Yes.
go to look at Palmyra now, you don't see the front porch. It's more of a straight siding down. All that front porch stuff that you see constructed.
Here and here. Yeah.
I think that was done after the original house. So when they went in and restored it later on in more recent years and put it back to its original condition, you don't see all the porch going around it so much. Just
Now,
in
which
case you're
house is
wondering.
this, David?
This is the Joseph Smith, the frame home after the original cabin that Joseph Smith Jr. grew up in. This is the frame home they had after on the farm.
Is this Alvin's home?
Oh, I thought this was the one that unless he helped build it, this was the home that Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith lived in.
Well, they were in the cabin before, and then Alvin built them a
Right.
home. So I believe this is the Alvin Smith home.
Yeah, he might have helped construct
It started, and he didn't finish because of his early death. Well, let me jump into. I guess if you, Angeline, if you want to take it to another point here, I'm going to go ahead and while you're talking, I'm going to jump into actually the transcription of his life sketch.
Yeah, I don't know much about Jesse, so I don't have a lot to say.
Okay.
Well, I'd kind of like to know what was the process of him relocating. Well, I guess he was assigned to go to Snowflake, wasn't he, to help build that up? What was that?
Yeah, I could explain that a little bit more. So, in fact, I don't remember everything I read from the journal, a few decades ago, but I was reviewing that little video our family organization made, and I saw that you have that up on your site there, Kimball. That reminded me of the ages. He and his brother were around 17, or his older brother would have been a little bit older, but they were asked to go with their mother, Mary Akins, by Brigham Young, after living up in, I think, North Canyon, or the Farmington area of Utah, down to Parowan. So they first went to Parowan, And there he met and married before too long that first Emma, his first wife. And so that's where he started and helped pioneer and build up, just as Brigham Young asked him and his brother to do. And he was there until his 40s in Parowan. And it's amazing the things that he did. He got involved in a lot of public service in various positions and ended up as a counselor in a stake presidency before he ever left Parowan. And it was during that time that he served twice in Scandinavia, having to leave his family at home to do that. But then he was asked, Erastus Snow went down with a group, including Jesse N. Smith and William Flake, down into Arizona and established a new city in what they decided to call Snowflake in northeastern Arizona. And by then, Jesse was in his 40s, and some of his family, or older families had already grown, but he took his wives and family, went down there, built the cabin we saw the picture of earlier, and there he was called to be the stake president of the Eastern Arizona stake. And he was the stake president for actually about 30 years there, I believe, 3 decades. First it was the Eastern Arizona stake, and then they divided it to be the Snowflake stake, right around Snowflake where his family lived. So that's how he ended up there. He did surveying and just worked with actually did a lot of relations between the church and the various organizations, cattle companies, whatever going on around in northeastern Arizona to try to get things to work, and a lot of visiting of the communities as the stake president and so on. He's just very involved in church and community service, both. And he was there, like we talked about, he actually met Emma Larson there. Her family had come down, and yeah, she was not, Emma Larson wasn't born in Sweden. She was born in West Valley area of Salt Lake County. And if you've ever heard of the Hole in the Rock expedition through the most terrible part of Utah, Måns Larsen, who he and his wife had been joined the church in Sweden and had come over, on a boat and across the plains on a handcart, and then settled there, and then finally started making a good life in Santa Quinn, Utah. Was called by Brigham Young to go down, and guess what? He ended up in Snowflake. He was sent down. But the way he got down at the time, he made 2 trips, and the time with his second wife, they went through that Hole in the Rock expedition, and it was his child, Larson, that was born during the middle of a snowstorm up at the top of the Hole in the Rock after all the rest of the group had started to head down. But they crossed down and ended up going down into Snowflake, and there as Emma Larson grew into a young lady. She was very popular and would have been wanted by many of the young men, but Jesse had decided, or was told, I don't know which, that he needed to marry one more wife, and he was interested in her, and she decided that she would rather have Jesse, a good man, rather than all the young men there. So he accepted his offer because she appreciated the kind of man that Jesse was so much. And so they got married, and that's where those last 9 children were raised there. So a lot of the family was in Parowan of Jesse's with his earlier wives, and then a lot ended up in Snowflake. And, speaking of the Smith family, his older brother, Silas Sanford Smith, was called eventually to settle southeastern Colorado, and was in that area, and he was a stake president there. So there's a lot of Smith descendants, because he had several wives as well, a bunch of them in Colorado. That was Jesse's brother, Silas Sanford Smith. And Jesse had the most. All those 44 children, many of which were raised in Snowflake.
So, David, you had told me that Jesse was actually being considered to be an apostle at some point. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't recall offhand that he was actually considered, but what I remember in what was listed in the end of the printing of his journal when it was printed were some letters that were sent to the family after he died. And one of the letters, it seems to me it might have come from Heber J. Grant, or it might have been one of the others. I'd have to go look. But he stated something very interesting. I mean, we're talking about someone that's like the prophet of the church, saying, telling the family, not telling Jesse because he died, but telling the family, he was a great man, and sometimes I wonder if why he wasn't called instead of me to be up here in the leadership of the church because of the great man he was. But the idea is that they needed his skills down there in the lawless area of northeastern Arizona, and to build up and support the church there. But I got that impression from the letter that some of the leaders in the church thought of him as an equal in his ability and faithfulness, even though he wasn't called in. Now, whether or not he was actually seriously considered to be one of the apostles, I'm not sure. I don't remember that. But they did consider him to be that kind of quality person.
Mm-hmm. And he was fundamental or key to the church's growth in northern Arizona.
Yeah. Well, and also in Parowan, and in Utah as well. He was actually a member of the Utah State Legislature for a while, and then later on a member of the Arizona State Legislature. So he's very active in community life as well as in church leadership. In fact, one little incident I think I'll add on that I noticed a number of years later is sometimes you hear about what was it called, the Mormon Massacre, when there was a Missouri train, wagon train that was coming down through Utah, and of course the saints were very worried about the Missourians and the hatred they had for them, and what are they going to do about these people coming down through Utah? And there were some people that talked about it, and eventually something kind of unfortunate happened where people took into their own hands, some local people, and actually killed the people in the wagon train there. Jesse and Smith wasn't involved in that, but he was in that area of Utah, and I read some documentation where he was in some meetings, and when some of that issue was brought up, he was against doing anything against the wagon train. I mean, he was a good man, and he knew that you wouldn't want to hurt these people. He was against that. There was some other local leaders more directly involved that eventually did that. And the somewhat younger Jesse and Smith at the time says, let's not be involved in that, against that. So he was involved in a lot of stuff, both in Utah and then later in Arizona.
And now that we have the life sketch transcribed, I'm going to go ahead and search for Massacre and see what he writes. I'm sure he's talked about that probably. Obviously, he being among a lot of the saints down there in the South, I'm sure that was a riveting experience, I'm sure, throughout his lifetime. So I'll tell you if I find anything interesting. Anyway, well, that's probably it. Is there anything else that we want to share about Jesse, David?
Well, nothing coming to my mind right now unless you have any questions.
I am curious about that wagon train story, because I've
Yeah.
heard a little bit about it, but I've not actually heard the entire story.
You know, I'm not an expert on that, and they've since erected a monument there. I'm talking about the church because they recognized the problem that happened, and it wasn't something that the top leadership of the church advocated. That some of the local people got involved, and what they did is, and I can't remember all the reasoning, but they were worried about the group coming through, and I don't know if any of them were trying to seek vengeance of some sort, whatever it was. But they tried to blame it on the Indians. So they dressed up, some of the people that got involved in the local area dressed up as Indians to, the Native Americans there, to blame it on them. But it was a problem that some members of the church down there made a mistake. And Jesse did, I don't know, some minutes somewhere of some meeting, it showed what he said. I don't know if he mentions it in his journal, actually.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that. I don't see it yet. He talks a lot about Indians and wagon trains and so on and so forth, but I haven't found anything about the actual
Anything about
killings that
Mountain
occurred.
Meadows?
No, I'm keep searching here.
Yeah.
I'm just searching strictly his life sketch, not his journal yet. But I'm sure his journal has a lot of detail about that. He has a very extensive journal. If anybody's interested, you could read that. One thing that I have learned when I've gone and traced Jesse's roots in Parowan and whatnot, there were some letters on the wall that were framed by some of his wives, and they talked about missing him, that he wasn't with them much, with themselves, because he had several wives and he had a lot of church responsibilities and he was constantly traveling. He was away a lot, and these women were very lonely. And Kathy, my cousin, could comment on that if we ever want to loop her in some future day about some of the stuff that she's found from that situation in those families. But there's a lot of longing to be with him, and I think that it just kind of stresses a little bit about what kind of a man he was, that they loved him dearly, that his wives loved him dearly and wanted to be with him as much as possible. So that was kind of a touching thing for me to learn about who Jesse was.
About the time his last child was born from Emma Larson. Yeah, Jesse, I think, died at 70, right when about the time his last child was born through Emma Larson. So about
60,
same
yeah,
age,
70, yeah.
Same age as your dad, and I'm getting to that
Uh-oh.
in 2 months. 1 month later this month.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, just don't let Kimball interview you.
yeah.
Well, ultimately, Angeline, it was you that was wanting to do the interview, not me. So, I mean,
Yeah. Yep.
we have an inside joke, David, that every single time Angeline and I interview someone, within a short period after people pass away, just because
Okay, I was wondering.
probably in large part we've interviewed a lot of elderly in our life.
Yeah.
But
Well, that's great. I'm glad.
I'm
you
not
did
coupling you as an elderly man. I'm still seeing you as a young, a
So-
young 20-something-year-old that married a very beautiful woman. So.
Yeah. Well, so have you interviewed Angelina's dad yet?
No, I have not interviewed Angeline's dad because I don't want to. I want him to stay on this earth for a lot longer.
Yeah, I've enjoyed talking with him, and I know he's been associated with the other group. You know that one we've been to, the LDS Association of Family Associations, or whatever it's called.
LDSFA. Yeah, LDS AFA.
Yeah.
LDS Ancestral Families Association. Yes.
Yeah, those are the Bruff brothers, I think, that kind of got that going. And there's a,
Right.
but I've talked to Michael there, representing his family, the Joseph Smith family, and so it's been fun. I know he's had a lot of chance to talk, but some firesides, I believe. You maybe remember those, Angelina?
Oh yeah, he's always gone.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Well, any other questions, Kim?
Well, I was going to ask Kimball, who are you named after?
Yes, so That's going to be an extensive answer, but so I am a Woolley, which is Spencer W. Kimball. That's what that W comes from. And in fact, my parents, when they were going to name me, they wanted to name me Woolley. My
Oh,
dad wanted to name me Woolley, first name Woolley, and my mom said no, he'll be teased because hairy and woolly and all that. And I'm grateful that she fought for that. She said so they agreed on the name Kimball after Spencer W. Kimball. So Spencer W. Kimball is my first cousin, I believe 5 times removed or 4 times removed. I'm not sure. And because we're Woolies, Edwin D. Woolley, which was John Wickersham Woolley's father, is the same ancestor that Spencer W. Kimball comes from. And then Hiram is my middle name, and of course that's after Hiram Smith, who is Jesse's son, the one that we've been talking about today, who served over there in Palmyra with his lovely wife, June. And of course Hiram Smith was named after Joseph's brother Hiram. So, likely, I presume.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, I was just going to mention that it's kind of interesting that, when I look at my cousin relationship, Joseph Smith Jr., I'm one of his first cousins, 3 times removed. Same thing with Spencer W. Kimball.
Huh.
First cousins,
Four.
3 times removed, but they're so far apart as far as ages of prophets, right, between Spencer W. Kimball. But that's because of the generation differences. Anyways, my great-grandmother, Emma Woolley, who married my Clark ancestor, Charles, her first cousin was Spencer Woolley Kimball, and also another one was J. Reuben Clark, which you might be familiar with.
Also from the Woolies, who would also be
they're all-
her first cousin 3 times removed as well.
Yeah, they're all
Yes.
first cousins 3 times removed. As
Correct.
the reason that it's so further back on the Smith side is because, besides the fact I'm the youngest of my family, Hiram Smith was from the 5th wife of Jesse and Smith, right? Jesse and Smith was the very youngest of all the grandchildren, a generation younger than Joseph Smith. That's why it doesn't take many generations for us to get back to that,
Yeah.
the Smith family.
So, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in and talk a little bit about Jesse's son Lehi, who was killed in World War I. I want to read to you this recount this story in Kindex. It's sad, but I think that we need to just understand the realities of war here a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so here we have. Now what this is a book of all of the letters that Lehi sent while he was on the front. And one of the profound letters that he wrote, right at the very beginning, he would say, "somewhere in mud." So that gives you an idea of the trench warfare that they were fighting. So this is the recounting of someone who was in his group of what happened. About midnight, the Germans bombarded us. A shell fell directly on Lehi. The shock was so near to me that I thought I was going to be thrown out of my dugout. We did not sleep any more that night. I did not hear a sound from Lehi, but I knew he was dead. When daylight finally came, I could see pieces of his clothes and blankets hanging on the trees. I went and found the captain and told him Lehi was dead. He went with me to see. We found the upper part of his body natural, his head, arms, and chest natural, one leg, and most of the other gone. And here's the original here on the left. We gathered up all pieces we could find, wrapped him in my blanket, his blankets entirely destroyed, and buried him in shell hole where he was killed. I made a cross and placed identification marks and tags upon it. I had lost my helmet or used Lehi's all the rest of the time I was fighting. I intended to bring it home with me, but had to return it, and then I couldn't tell it from the others. I had forgotten to mark it. Everybody liked Lehi. He was sure a good boy. We all called him Lehi instead of Smith. He was known by everybody as Lehi because there were other Smiths. This is all we can remember now. Asahel. So that was probably someone that was in his group. Now, this is an interesting account because we don't have the original letters. What they did at the time is they transcribed those original letters into a greater book. And so, unfortunately, it has to be a second-hand account. But we hope someday to find those original letters. And then it goes on talking about, this is another one, in talking about the Great War to Mrs. Follow. I think they got the word wrong, Mrs. Roten. So I can fix that. From Lakeside, she told me about your son Lehi Smith being killed in France. There was a Lehi L. Smith in my organization who was killed at night within 25 yards of me by direct hit of a shell. Could that be your son? Which of course it was. My organization was Company 1, 353, or I-353, Infantry 89th Division. He was blown to pieces while we were holding a position in the Argonne Forest north of Verdun. I saw his grave and his name on the headstone. Yours with great sympathy. So
I'm
another,
curious. They're sending this to his mom,
yeah,
saying he was
another.
blown to pieces. I mean, I don't. Oh gosh, that breaks my
I
heart
mean,
that they
I
had to say that.
yeah. So this is, dear madam. Yeah, probably. I mean, what's I think interesting to me here though is you see a little bit of you see the turmoil on the front and the reality, right, of
Yeah.
war. And what are they supposed to do? They're just going to
Hmm.
write the way they see it and send it. And what they did is they at least witnessed it and let the family know what
Yeah.
happened. Because could you imagine if they didn't know, and if she didn't have a second witness that this happened? Then you
Yeah.
would question, did it happen, right? And so now you have a second witness, and I think that's really important.
You know, Emma Larson actually stated that she, at the time it happened, she felt something was wrong.
No.
She had gotten that feeling at the time it happened, and then of course it was confirmed later.
So, yeah, it's really, really profound stuff. When you start transcribing these records of these people that they've written about, we tend to ignore them because they're just cursive, right?
Yeah.
Or they might be in a foreign language or an older way of speaking, and there's a lot of gems in there that are just touching. And when we start to look back at our ancestors, this is part of getting to understand the hearts of our ancestors, and instead of just understanding the logical details about their life, such as their date of birth or place of death or divorce records or marriage records, this actually gives you the ability to peer into their hearts and understand what they went through and
Yeah.
say, I can do this because they did it, or they did it poorly, I can do it better, you know? And this is, I think, why it's so important that we understand the hearts of our ancestors and understand their minds and the way they were thinking and their situations they were dealing with at the time.
Yeah.
So I thought this is an important thing to share about Lehi Smith. This was actually, this says October 20th, 1919. I'm trying to figure out when the original letter was written, but from my understanding, I think it was a day or two before the close of the war.
Do you know
Literally,
how
he
old
made it
Lehi
through.
was?
Uh, let's just take a look at Family Search.
Like when he died?
Yeah, 1918. Let's see what day it was. I'm sure they have it specific. October 28th, 1918.
Mm.
So we have to see when the actual close of the war was, but I believe it was within a day or two of the close of the war, maybe even a week. So it's sad to know that he went through, quote, somewhere in mud, this whole war experience, only to be killed just a few days before the end of the war. And interestingly enough, just a little side note, I actually had another ancestor on my mother's side who also fought in World War I and died in the very same day as Lehi Larson Smith. His name was Clark Guthrie Fox,
No. Wow.
up in Idaho. So that was a really profound thing to kind of find out for me, as I was, reading, doing family history, has been really helpful and healing for me as I go through life.
So Lehi was only 17. Wow.
Good point. Yeah, maybe
Wow.
18. Yeah,
It's so sad.
17. Yeah, correct. So
Huh.
he must have got in as a young. Well, no, he wasn't. He wasn't 17. He was older than that. 20.
Born in 91, 1891.
1891. Yeah. So
1891.
he's 26, 27, maybe. 9, 25. Yeah. All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Angeline.
you.